The gravel crunched under my tires like old bones as I pulled up to the farmhouse, dust swirling in the late afternoon sun. My boots hit the ground heavy, carrying the weight of city pavement I'd shaken off for this, back to the Midwest sprawl where the wind carries the scent of turned earth and regret. There she stood on the porch, arms crossed tight over her chest, flannel shirt stretched across shoulders that had known real work. Her eyes hit me sharp as winter wind cutting through bare fields, sizing me up like I was just another storm to weather. "This is my place now," I said, papers clutched in my hand, the ink still fresh on the inheritance. She didn't move, didn't blink. "You've been gone 10 years. I've bled for this land every day since." The words hung between us, my right to sell clashing against her quiet claim, forged in sweat and calluses. Sell or stay. The family legacy dangled by a thread, frayed as the porch railing. Silence choked the air, thick with dust and the unspoken fight ahead. You know that pull, the one that drags you back to roots you thought you'd outrun? My father's call came on a Tuesday, voice crackling over the line from the hospital bed he never left. "The farm's yours, Ellie. Don't let it go." He was gone by Friday, heart giving out like an overworked engine in the dead of night. I hung up my city life, the apartment with its hum of traffic, the job that paid in fluorescent lights and forgotten dreams, and drove west, inheritance papers folded in my glove box like a promise I wasn't sure I wanted to keep. The fields stretched out endless under a flat sky, corn stalks whispering secrets to the wind as I turned onto the drive. I'd expected emptiness, the kind that settles after loss, just echoes of childhood summers spent chasing fireflies across the acres Dad tilled alone after Mom left. The house loomed weathered but standing, paint peeling like old skin, the barn a shadow against the horizon. I killed the engine, stepped out into air, thick with the tang of hay and distant rain. No one to greet me but the creak of windmills turning lazy circles. That's when she emerged from the barn, wiping her hands on denim pants streaked with mud, tall, built solid from years of labor, her dark hair tied back under a worn hat, strands escaping like they had a mind of their own. Calluses etched her palms, visible even from the drive, and her gaze steadied on me, brown eyes holding the quiet resolve of someone who'd stared down droughts and debts. "Ellie," she said, voice low, like gravel under tires. Not a question, just fact. She'd known I was coming. Dad must have told her. I straightened, papers in hand. "Lena, right? Dad mentioned you helped out the last few years." Helped out, as if that covered the way she'd kept the place from crumbling while he faded. She nodded once, stepping closer, boots leaving prints in the soft earth. More than helped, ran it when he couldn't. Her tone carried no accusation, just truth, plain as the furrows in the field behind her. We stood there, the sun dipping lower, casting long shadows that tangled our feet. I unfolded the papers, the legal weight of them suddenly heavy. "I'm here to settle things. The will's clear. It's mine now. I've got a realtor coming next week. We can make this quick. Sell it off, pocket the cash, get back to the life where silence didn't echo so loud. The city needed coders like me, not ghosts of failed farms." Her jaw tightened, just a flicker, but I saw it. The resilience mirroring the land's stubborn hold, roots digging deep against the plow. "Quick!" She let out a breath, short and sharp. "I've poured 10 years into this soil, fixed the fences after storms took them down, pulled calves in the dead of night when your dad was too weak. This isn't some city plot to flip. It's alive. Breathing." Her words landed like thrown hay bales, heavy and unyielding, each one stacking the wall between us. I shifted, the papers crinkling. "It's not personal. Dad knew I wasn't coming back. He wanted me to have the choice." But even as I said it, doubt crept in, the way the porch light used to flicker on summer evenings, unreliable as hope. She uncrossed her arms, hands flexing at her sides. "Choice. That's rich. You think walking away 10 years ago was a choice? Leaving him to handle it alone?" No heat in her voice, just the steady burn of someone who'd stayed when others fled. Her eyes held mine, unflinching, pulling at something buried. The girl who'd once dreamed of these fields. Not escape. The exchange stretched, words giving way to the hum of cicadas rising in the heat. I wanted to argue, to push back against her quiet claim, but her presence rooted me, the farm's pulse echoing in her stance. Sell or stay? The stakes whispered louder now. Legacy, not just land, but the sweat we'd both spilled, willingly or not. That weight settled in as the sun slipped behind the barn, her unspoken challenge hanging like dew on the grass. Heavy, inevitable. I turned toward the house, boots echoing on the steps. But the silence followed, thick as the dusk, closing in. That night, the farm's quiet forced me to unpack more than boxes. The first morning broke with a rooster's call that sliced through the thin walls, pulling me from a sleep, tangled in sheets that smelled of dust and faint lavender. I lay there a moment, the ceiling beams staring back like old accusations before dragging myself up. The kitchen was already alive with the scent of coffee brewing strong, black as the soil out back. Lena moved at the stove, back to me, flipping eggs in a cast-iron pan with a flick of her wrist. She didn't turn when I entered, just slid a mug across the counter. Black, like the work ahead. Clipped, no room for sugar or small talk. I wrapped my hands around the warmth, the steam curling up like unspoken words. Thanks. We ate in silence, forks scraping plates, the clock ticking louder than it should. Separate. Beds upstairs, mine in the old room with its quilt patched from Mom's days, hers in the guest space down the hall, a divide as clear as the hallway floorboards. But the kitchen bound us, this shared space where the air hung heavy with the weight of what wasn't said. She pushed back from the table first, grabbing her hat. Chores don't wait for city schedules. I followed her out, the screen door slapping shut behind us like a punctuation mark. The barn loomed, doors ajar, and she handed me a pitchfork without looking. Hay first, then the milking. Her instructions came sharp, like fence wire. Feed the horses this way. Check the troughs for leaks. Watch the cows' flanks for signs of bloat. I stumbled through it, arms burning from the lift, sweat beading under my shirt in the rising heat. She watched from the corner of her eye, correcting with a nod or a grunt, her presence steady as the posts we passed. As we worked, her story slipped out in fragments, pieced together like the bales we stacked. She'd come 5 years back, after Dad's first stroke left him leaning on a cane, more than a plow. Your father called me from town. Said the place was slipping, needed hands that wouldn't quit. Lena had been drifting then, fresh from a family spread in Nebraska that scattered after her own folks passed in a flood. No ties, just a knack for soil and stubbornness. She started with odd jobs, mending what broke, but when the illness dug in deeper, she stayed. Couldn't leave him to rot alone. The land either. It's got a way of holding on. Her voice softened there, eyes on the horizon where the fields met sky, revealing the toll, the nights without sleep, the debts she'd shouldered to keep the tractor running. I nodded, wiping my brow, but inside the resistance churned. Back in the house that afternoon, phone in hand, I dialed the realtor from the city listing, voice low in the parlor. Yeah, it's viable, good for development, maybe a strip mall if the zoning holds. Dreams flickered of escape, the hum of cafes, deadlines that ended at 5, isolation traded for crowds. But Lena's shadow fell across the doorway, her quiet barbs landing soft as rain on dry ground. City softness shows in those calls. You think concrete cares about loyalty to the soil? This place fed your bloodline. Now you're hawking it like yesterday's feed. Her words stung, probing the ache I'd buried. We clashed in glances across the yard, her unyielding yet worn, the curve of her shoulders under faded flannel, carrying the farm's burdens like they were her own skin. Evenings blurred into shared silences at the table, passing salt without touch, the air thick with the scent of stew and unspoken yields. I caught myself watching her then, the way her fingers gripped the fork, steady from years of reins and ropes, a quiet strength that mirrored the ridges beyond the barn. One night, after a long day hauling water to the troughs, we sat with plates of venison she'd hunted last. Fall. The lantern light played across her face, softening the lines, etched by wind and worry. Our eyes met over the rim of glasses, mine searching for cracks in her resolve, hers holding a flicker of something deeper, unspoken. The moment stretched, forked still, the first real pause in the tension, where silence felt less like a wall and more like a bridge waiting to be crossed. But the fences needed mending, pulling us into reluctant partnership. The sun beat down like a hammer on anvil the next day, turning the fields into a shimmer of heat that warped the horizon. We headed to the north fence line, where wires sagged like tired shoulders after last winter's ice had twisted the posts. Lena carried the coil under one arm, pliers dangling from her belt, her stride eating up the ground while I trailed with the mallet, its head heavy as regret. "Wire first," she said, kneeling to splice a break, her fingers deft, twisting metal with the ease of someone who'd wrestled worse than rust. I crouched beside her, trying to match the rhythm, but my hands fumbled the barbs, drawing a thin line of blood that welled hot against my skin. She glanced over, eyes narrowing not in judgment but instruction. "Grip looser. Let it give." Our knuckles brushed as she guided the pliers. Once, twice, sparks unspoken jumping in the space between, the sun baking sweat into our shirts, clinging like second skin. I pulled back too quick, heat rising in my cheeks to match the burn on my palms, but she just nodded and moved on, uncoiling more as if the touch meant nothing. Everything. By midday, we shifted to the posts, rotten ones needing replacement. She drove the first with steady swings, mallet thudding deep into earth, her shoulders rolling with the force, flannel darkening at the small of her back. Like this. Plant your feet, swing from the hips. I took the tool, swung awkward, the post wobbling more than sinking, my arms aching from the unfamiliar weight. She stepped behind, hands on mine to adjust the angle, her breath warm against my neck for a beat too long. "Breathe into it. The land don't yield to force alone." I drove again, harder, the wood biting ground, but frustration coiled in my gut, mixing with the pull of her nearness, solid and unyielding. Back at the house for water, conflicts simmered over lunch, bread and cheese on the porch, the realtor's email buzzing my phone. "We rotate the corn next spring," she said, slicing tomato with a knife that flashed in the light. "Keeps the soil from starving." I shook my head, scrolling listings. "No spring. Prep for sale now. Clear the fields. Make it look open." Her fork paused, eyes meeting mine across the table, the air thickening like before a squall. "You're killing what's alive here. For what? A check to chase city lights?" Words sharpened, her voice low but edged, mine rising in defense of escape, the legacy I carried like a chain. Words spread fast in these parts, rural whispers filtering through, like wind through cracks. Old man Hargrove stopped by that afternoon, truck rattling up with a load of feed, his eyes flicking between us as we unloaded sacks. "Heard Ellie's back, and you two holding the fort alone. Folks talk, you know. 2 women out here, no menfolk." Lena's jaw set, but she just grunted thanks and waved him off, the gossip hanging like chaff in the air. I felt it too, the isolation pressing in, judgments from church pews and co-op lines, making the farm feel smaller, our partnership a secret under scrutiny. Exhaustion hit by evening, bodies worn from the labor, revealing glimpses beneath the strain. As we stacked tools in the shed, she smiled rare and fleeting, wiping mud from her brow, vulnerability cracking through in the sag of her frame, the way her hands trembled slight after the drive. I caught it, that internal pull tightening, drawing me to her quiet fire amid the fatigue. But it broke near dusk, the tractor coughing dead in the lower field, engine seized from neglect I'd overlooked in my haste. "You let it sit," I snapped, kicking the tire, voices echoing across the empty acres. "This is why we sell. Can't afford breakdowns." She rounded on me, eyes flashing. "Afford! I've kept it running on nothing while you were gone. You waltz in, ready to gut the heart of it." We stood chest to chest, breaths mingling hot, the argument hanging raw until she turned away, shoulders taut. The rhythm of work blurred then, lines of ownership fading into the shared ache of the day, fences mended but divides deeper. Then the sky darkened, turning our standoff into survival. The radio crackled to life that evening, static breaking the quiet like a warning shot. I fiddled with the dial in the kitchen, seeking signal amid the growing rumble outside. Severe weather advisory. The voice cut through, tinny and urgent. Midwest Fury building, winds up to 60, flash flooding in low fields. Seek shelter now. Lena paused at the sink, hands still in soapy water from the dishes, her back going rigid. She'd felt it coming all day, the air heavy, sky bruising purple over the ridges. Storm's here, she said flat as fact, drying her palms on a rag before grabbing the hammer from the drawer. I watched her move, hesitation rooting me to the linoleum. City habits died hard. Back home I'd seal windows with plastic sheeting for winter drafts, not this frantic boarding against nature's rage. But she was already out the door, boots thudding down the steps, urgent hands prying plywood from the shed. We worked side by side as dusk fell fast, nailing boards over the farmhouse glass, the wind picking up, whipping dust into our eyes. She secured the shutters with practiced twists, her flannel sleeves rolled to elbows, muscles corded from the strain. I hammered clumsy, nails bending under my swings, the clash of metal echoing her ingrained instincts, years of reading clouds like old letters, knowing when to batten down before the sky unleashed. Livestock next. The barn doors banged in the gusts as we herded cows into stalls, their lowing rising with the thunder rolling distant. Lena's voice cut sharp over the din, directing me to tie leads, check gates, her hands flashing to latch the final one just as lightning forked the horizon. Sweat slicked her neck, a strand of hair escaping her hat to cling there, but she didn't pause, shoving hay bales against the walls for ballast. I followed, heart pounding not just from the rush, but the press of her nearness in the dimming light, our shoulders brushing as we braced the structure. They've survived worse, she muttered. More to the animals than me, but her eyes met mine brief, holding a flicker of the land's defiance. Back inside, the air thickened with humidity, pressing like a hand on my chest. We descended to the basement, stairs creaking underfoot, lantern in her grip casting jittery shadows on concrete walls lined with jars of preserves from summers past. The space felt small, root cellar cool against the heat building above, shelves sagging under the weight of canned peaches and beans. Dad's handiwork, now hers. I settled on an old blanket, knees drawn up, the lantern light playing across her face as she checked the battery radio again. Static hissing updates. Tension hung thick as the damp, our bodies close in the confines, breaths sinking with the storm's growl. She sat across from me, knees almost touching mine, and the talk turned to past storms, words spilling like the first fat drops pattering the ground overhead. One hit when I first came, she said, voice low, lantern flame dancing in her eyes. Tore the roof off the silo, flooded the lower pasture, lost half the herd, calves swept away like leaves. Losses on this land, etched in her tone, the way her fingers traced a scar on her forearm from barbed wire in the aftermath. I shared fragments then, city storms I'd known, rain lashing windows while I scrolled feeds, safe but distant, no roots to rip free. Never felt it like this, I admitted, the confession pulling at the space between us, her nod slow, understanding without pity. Thunder cracked closer, shaking the foundation, lights flickering upstairs before dying to black. The wind howled now, a living thing clawing at the boards, forcing reliance in the dim. My hand trembled on the lantern as another boom rattled jars on the shelves, and hers reached out, steady, calloused, covering mine in the shadows. Breathe, she murmured, thumb brushing my knuckles once, warm against the chill seeping through stone. The touch lingered. Subtle shift in the charged air, her presence anchoring as the storm raged, walls trembling but holding. As rain hammered down, turning earth to mud beyond the walls, the real flood came, not just water, but truth. The basement walls shook harder, water seeping under the door in thin sheets that pooled at our feet. Thunder rolled like wagon wheels over gravel, but it was the roar outside that pulled us up, low, insistent, like the creak behind the barn had woken angry. Lena's hand slipped from mine as she stood, lanterns swinging shadows across her face. "That's not just rain." Her voice cut the din, eyes narrowing toward the stairs. I followed, heart thudding against ribs, the air upstairs thick with ozone and the metallic tang of flood. We cracked the door to the porch, wind slamming it back, rain sheeting horizontal like needles. The yard churned to mud, rivulets snaking from the fields. But the creek, God, the creek had breached. Froth-white water surged past its banks, clawing at the barn's foundation 30 yards out, the structure groaning under the assault. Calves lowed inside, panicked calls cutting through the gale, their mothers stamping in stalls we'd barely secured. "The herd," Lena said, already shrugging into her oilskin coat, hat jammed low. "We lose them. The farm's done." Stakes hit me then. Not just land, but lives tied to it. The pulse of what she'd poured her years into, what Dad had left me to guard or gut. No time for argument. She bolted into the night, me grabbing a slicker from the hook, boots slipping as I chased. Rain lashed my face, cold and relentless, soaking through in seconds, vision blurring to sheets of gray. We slogged toward the barn, mud sucking at our heels, ropes coiled over shoulders like lifelines. Lena led, body cutting the storm, shouting over the howl to unlatch the main gate. Water lapped our calves now, rising fast, debris, branches, fence scraps, bobbing past like warnings. Inside, chaos. Cows milling, eyes wide in lantern glow, a calf wedged against a post, bleeding as flood seeped under the doors. "Start with the young ones," she yelled, wading to the far stall, rope looping a heifer's neck. I nodded, hands numb but moving, tying off a yearling, hauling it toward higher ground. The loafing shed on the rise, our only shot. Strain burned in my arms, muscles screaming from the pull, water climbing to knees, threatening to sweep us under. Lena worked beside, directing with sharp gestures, her shouts lost, but her path clear, calf after calf, her strength unyielding, flannel plastered to her frame, dark hair streaming rivers down her back. A gatepost cracked then, wood splintering under pressure, flood pouring in like a dam burst. Cows surged, panicked, one bullock bolting toward the creekside, Lena after it without pause. "Lena!" I called, but the wind swallowed it, rope trailing from her hand. She reached the edge, looping the animal just as the current yanked, water foaming calf-deep, pulling at her legs. The bullock thrashed, dragging her toward the drop-off where the bank had eroded, mud crumbling underfoot. She dug heels in, grit teeth, but the rope slipped, her boot sliding on slick rock. I dropped my lead, splashed through, grabbing her waist from behind, arms locking around her middle. The pull was brutal, current like hands clawing, cold shock biting skin, but held. Feet planted in the sucking earth, hauling back with everything. "Let go," she gasped, but I didn't. Muscles quivering, rain blinding until the rope gave way. Bullock free, but her safe, collapsing against me in the shallower flood. We stumbled to the barn wall, breaths ragged, her hand clutching my arm, eyes meeting in the flash of lightning, gratitude raw, unspoken, walls cracking like the post. The rest blurred, more rescues, heaving gates with shoulders burning, pulling stragglers to the shed as water crested the barn floor. Dawn crept gray when the gale eased, rain to drizzle, flood receding slow, leaving wreckage. Fences twisted, fields scarred, but the herd intact, lowing soft in the aftermath. Exhaustion hit like a wave, bodies soaked, clinging clothes heavy as sodden earth, breaths mingling in the chill air. We leaned against the shed, sides heaving, her shoulder to mine, the first light picking out the lines of her face softened by fatigue, eyes holding mine longer than the storm demanded. In that soaked silence, revelation settled. Gratitude in her gaze, deep as the creek's run, crumbling what remained between us, wet and real. Drying by the fire, the silence held something heavier than rain. Steam rose from our clothes like ghosts in the firelight, the farmhouse hearth crackling against the damp that clung to everything. We stumbled inside, mud trailing across the threshold, bodies heavy with the night's toll. Lena kicked the door shut, her breath still coming in sharp pulls, and I followed her to the living room where the old stone fireplace waited, embers banked low from the evening before. She knelt first, coaxing flames to life with kindling and a poker, her wet shirt molding to the curve of her back, every movement deliberate despite the shake in her hands. I stood there a moment, dripping onto the rug, before grabbing blankets from the linen closet, thick wool ones, smelling of cedar and thyme. "Here," I said, draping one over her shoulders as she rose, the fabric settling warm against her chill. She pulled it close, nodding once, then turned to wrap the other around me, her fingers brushing my arms in the pass. We sank onto the threadbare sofa, bodies close for the warmth, bleeding from the fire, knees touching in the narrow space, steam curling up between us like a shared breath. The silence wrapped tighter than the wool, heavier than the rain still pattering the roof, but it wasn't empty now, just full of what we'd survived. The unspoken shift in the air. She stared into the flames, the light carving shadows across her face, softening the lines etched by years out here. "Lost my folks young," she started, voice low, like pulling words from deep soil. "Flood took them. Nebraska River swelled one spring, swept the house clean off its posts. I was 18. Sister, barely 10. We clung to the roof till neighbors fished us out." Her fingers twisted the blanket's edge, knuckles white. "After that, places like this, they hold you. No family left but the land. Your dad gave me that when he hired on, something solid after everything floated away. Losses tied her here, roots twisted around the beams and furrows, no going back when the world could rinse clean in a night." I nodded, the fire's heat thawing the cold in my bones, pulling my own truths to the surface. "Ran from here because of the stairs," I admitted, gaze on my hands, still raw from ropes and mud. Small town. 2 girls holding hands at the fair got whispers that turned to shouts. Mom left first, chasing city lights, then me after high school. Thought roots were just chains, judgments, waiting to snag you. Fear of them, of staying and bending under the weight, had driven me east, to apartments where isolation meant crowds, not endless fields. But out here, the quiet stripped it bare, forcing the ache of what I'd fled right into the open. The undercurrent hummed then, rural isolation's toll pressing in, the long nights alone with the wind for company, desires buried under layers of flannel and fence wire, surfacing now in the fire's glow. Her hand shifted on the cushion, tentative, fingers grazing mine where they rested. I didn't pull away. Instead, I turned my palm up, letting her calluses map the lines there, tracing a faint scar from a childhood fall in the hayloft. She followed it slow, touchlight as ash, eyes lifting to meet mine, brown depths holding questions the storm had washed clear. My thumb brushed her wrist in return, feeling the pulse steady beneath, warm and real against the night's chill. Necessity born it. The need for anchor after the flood, bodies seeking what words couldn't hold. I leaned in, or maybe she did, the space closing like a gate swinging shut. Her lips met mine slow, tasting of salt from rain and sweat, storm still lingering on her skin. Soft at first, exploratory, her hand cupping my jaw, calluses rough against smoothness, pulling me deeper into the warmth we'd chased all night. I sank into it, fingers threading her damp hair, the kiss unfolding like roots, finding purchase, urgent, yet unhurried, breaths mingling with the fire's snap. We pulled back into quiet, foreheads touching, the farm feeling less like enemy ground and more like shared shelter. Walls, not between us, but around. The flames danced on, steady as her gaze holding mine. Days after, work resumed, but with a new undercurrent of pull. Days blurred into a rhythm after the storm. The farm, a canvas of wreckage we painted over together. We started at dawn, clearing debris from the fields, twisted wire, uprooted posts, mud-caked tools scattered like broken promises. Lena shoveled silt from the creek bank, her arms flexing under rolled sleeves, while I hauled branches to the burn pile, hands sinking into wet earth that clung like memory. Our fingers met in the dirt often now, passing buckets or prying rocks, each brush lingering a beat longer, building something stronger than the fences we'd mend. The land yielded slow, but so did we, sweat mixing with the scent of wet soil and pine sap rising from the splintered wood. By midday, decisions shifted from clashes to quiet merges. We spread maps across the kitchen table, coffee rings marking the edges, plotting a hybrid future, her crop rotations woven with my ideas for sustainable grants, blending her deep-rooted yields with city-sourced tech for irrigation. "We keep the corn here," she said, tracing lines with a calloused finger, her knee pressing mine under the wood. "But solar panels on the south ridge. Your call, if it fits." I nodded, the plans feeling less like compromise and more like roots intertwining, visions of steady income easing the farm's gasp for air. No more realtor calls, the papers gathered dust in a drawer, our talks turning soil into shared ground. Intimate moments wove into the routine, soft as dawn light, filtering through barn slats. Mornings began with coffee on the porch, mugs steaming in chilled air, her shoulder warm against mine as we watched mist lift from the valleys. "Tastes better black out here," she'd murmur, eyes on the horizon, but her free hand found my thigh, thumb circling slow through denim. Evenings pulled us along the ridges, boots crunching gravel paths, worn by years of her solitary walks, the sky bruising purple as we talked, her laughter rare but real when I stumbled over a root, pulling me upright with hands that stayed. The isolation felt less like a cage now, more like a quiet world just for us, desires surfacing in stolen glances, the curve of her neck catching sunset gold. But pressures, mounted from beyond the fences. Bank letters arrived crisp in the mail, stamped red with demands for payments overdue since Dad's illness, numbers climbing like weeds after rain. Lena spread them on the counter one afternoon, jaw tight. "They'll take it all if we don't pay." Neighbor doubts filtered in too, Hargrove dropping by with advice, his truck idling as he eyed our closeness. "2 women holding this spread, banks circling, and towns talking. Best sell before it swallows you." She waved him off, but the words lingered, stirring old fears in me, the judgments I'd fled, now pressing close as the fields. That night, by lantern light in the parlor, she opened fully, voice threading through the quiet like wind through reeds. "Lost everything once, house, family, the ground under my feet. Came here thinking it'd be temporary, but it dug in. Now you're the fear I didn't name. Losing this, losing you to the city. Pull." Her eyes held mine, raw with the hope of this unexpected partnership, hands trembling slight as she reached across the space. I covered them, feeling the pulse of her vulnerability, the way isolation had carved her solitary but now cracked open for us. Physical closeness evolved in the dim, touches no longer accidental. Nights blurred boundaries, her room becoming ours, bodies seeking under quilts, heavy as shared. Secrets. Fingers traced scars from old labors, mine from city scrapes, hers from wire and weather, leading to kisses that deepened, slow and sure, her weight pressing me into the mattress, breaths sinking like harvest cycles. We moved together, exploring with hands and lips, her mouth hot on my skin, drawing gasps that echoed the wind outside. No rush, just the steady build of trust, nights folding into mornings where waking tangled felt like home. It culminated one evening, debris cleared and fences rising anew as we stood on the ridge, sun dipping low. "I'm staying," I whispered, hand in hers, the words a commitment not to land alone, but to her, the resilience we'd forged in mud and mend. She turned, eyes soft, pulling me close. "Not for the soil, for you." Yet doubt lingered, testing the fragile hope we'd forged. The realtor's truck rumbled up the drive 2 weeks later, tires kicking dust like an unwelcome gust. I watched from the kitchen window, coffee going cold in my mug, the man's suit stark against the fields we'd just reseeded. Lena was out back, mending the last of the storm-twisted gate, her hammer strikes echoing steady until she saw him too. She set the tool down slow, wiped her hands on her jeans, and came inside without a word, her presence filling the room like the weight of unturned soil. He spread the papers across the oak table, crisp edges catching the midday light. filtering through unboarded windows. Prime spot for development, he said, voice smooth as city polish. Subdivisions, maybe a distribution center off the highway. Sign here and you're free. Cash in hand by fall. The pen he offered felt foreign in my grip, ink gleaming like a promise of escape. But my fingers hovered, the farm's pulse thrumming underfoot, alive with her footsteps behind me. Lena stood at the counter, arms crossed, but her eyes locked on mine, brown depths pulling like roots in drought. "Don't," she said, voice raw, scraping the air. The realtor glanced up, but she ignored him, stepping closer, her plea unfolding like a furrow split open. 10 years I've poured into this soil, blisters from the plow, nights pulling calves when the wind howled worse than any storm, fixed what broke, grew what wouldn't. And now it's us, what we've built in the mud, the quiet after rain. You can't just sign it away. Her words cracked, vulnerability bleeding through the study she'd worn like armor, hands flexing at her sides as if reaching for the land. For me. Doubt surged then, internal war raging silent. The city tugged, its buzz of lights, deadlines that ended clean, crowds swallowing judgments whole, no more isolation, no whispers from neighbors' trucks, just forward motion, unrooted. But her gaze held weight, heavy as the gaze of ridges at dawn, stirring the girl I'd buried under concrete. Was it flight or fear? Staying meant facing the bank's red ink, the town's sidelong looks at two women sharing a bed, a life. Leaving meant severing. Her from this ground she'd claimed as kin, as much as blood. The realtor cleared his throat, tapping the pen. "Ellie, time's money." But the storm of words broke first between us. I turned to her, voice rising sharp. "This isn't just soil, it's chains. Dad chained himself here, alone after Mom fled, and you're chaining me now with your looks, your hands in the dark." Accusations flew, mine lashing at her hold. Her flight from Nebraska mirrored in my urge to run. She fired back, defenses hard won, eyes flashing like lightning over fields. "Chaining? I've trusted you with this. Showed you the ropes, the scars, let you in when the flood took everything else. You think escape's freedom? It's just another drift, leaving wreckage for others to mend." I stayed for him, for this, stay for us. We stood inches apart, breaths quick, the air electric as pre-storm hush. Her chest rose and fell, flannel damp from morning work, the scent of earth and her clinging close. The realtor shifted, papers rustling, but the world narrowed to her, resilience carved in the line of her jaw, the way her fingers twitched toward mine. Internal pull twisted tighter, city lights fading against the warmth of her nearness, the trust we'd hammered out post-storm, night by night. What was escape without her? A hollow wind, turning point hit like a post, driven true. "I'm not leaving," I said, voice steady now, dropping the pen. It clattered on the wood, rolling to a stop. "Not the farm, not you." Her eyes widened, raw hope flickering, and she closed the gap, embrace sealing it, bodies aligning like fence posts in line, her arms wrapping solid around my waist, head tucking against my shoulder. I held her back, hands splaying across her back, feeling the thud of her heart match mine, the resilience we'd chosen over flight. The realtor packed his briefcase, muttering about second thoughts, but we didn't hear the door shut. Resolve cleared the air, hope earned through mud and mend, the land outside seeming to exhale, fields waiting for what came next. With the decision made, the land breathed easier around us. Seasons turned slow after that, the farm marking time in cycles we now shared. Fall brought the first joint harvest, air crisp with the scent of ripened corn, stalks bowing heavy under golden ears. We moved through the rows at dawn, sickles in hand, her blade slicing clean beside mine, the rhythm sinking like breaths in the dark. Sweat beaded on her brow as we loaded the wagon, hands brushing in the piles, fingers lingering to strip husks, the yield piling high, tangible proof of what we'd chosen. That night, we sat on the porch with jars of cider from the last press, her thigh warm against mine, watching fireflies pulse like stars fall into earth. This is what holds, she said, voice low, her hand covering mine on the railing, calluses rough against my skin. Life layered on, small ceremonies weaving us tighter. We marked the solstice with a fire in the pit, flames leaping as she carved our initials into a fence post, E and L, intertwined like the vines climbing the barn. Shared labors deepened it, mornings mending harnesses side by side, her teaching me the knot's twist while our knees touched on the workbench, evenings in the garden, planting bulbs that would bloom come spring, dirt under nails, her laughter soft when I unearthed a worm and flinched. Nights blurred further, bodies seeking under the quilt's weight, her mouth tracing my collarbone in the lantern's glow. Slow explorations that left us gasping, tangled in sheets, smelling of earth and her. Intimacy grew roots, her fingers mapping my hips with the same care she gave the soil, pulling moans that echoed the wind's sigh. Reflections came unbidden, pieced in quiet moments, like hauling hay bales under relentless sun, the ache in my back mirroring the journey from theft of land to theft of hearts. I'd stolen her solitude, she mine, but we'd traded it for this, a partnership forged in flood and fence, stronger than the isolation I'd fled. From clash to this, I murmured one afternoon, as we repaired the silo roof, her silhouette framed against blue sky, tools clinking in harmony. She paused, hammer mid-swing, eyes meeting mine with that unflinching warmth. Worth every storm. Trials lingered, weather's whims testing our grip, a late frost nipping the wheat, debts pressing like shadows at the bank window. Town's quiet judgments filtered in too, sidelong glances at the co-op when we arrived together, hands brushing over seed packets, whispers from pews about those two women holding the spread alone. Hargrove's truck idled once more, his words barbed. Folks say it's unnatural, you two out here. Bank's watching closer now. Lena's jaw set, but she just nodded him off, turning to me with a squeeze of my hand. Let them talk. We've got the land's truth. Her steadiness anchored it all, a metaphor for the enduring love we'd tilled, unyielding as ridge rock, weathering gales without break. In her I found the resilience I'd sought in escape, now rooted deep. Future glimpses unfolded in talks by the hearth, expansions with a small herd of her choosing, quiet vows exchanged under Midwest skies, streaked with Aurora's rare light. We'll build a life here, she'd say, pulling me close, her breath warm on my neck, expanding acres, but never the space between us. Hope took shape in those words, hard won from mud and mend, the farm no longer a chain but a circle, complete, breathing. It ended with a profound quiet of belonging, her arm around my waist as we surveyed the fields at dusk, the world vast but ours, rooted deep in soil and skin. Her hand slipped into mine at dawn, fields stretching endless under the rising sun, our fingers laced like furrows intertwined. Hard-won hope bloomed in the soil we tended together, resilience, our quiet vow. If this kind of quiet truth resonates, share your story below. Subscribe for more tales of finding home in unexpected places.